What AI does right now is when you give it that spark, that context, that point of view, even if it's not structured well, it could take that context and structure it near perfectly in whatever form that you need it. So you can have it structure it as a long form Facebook post, a short form Facebook post or tweet, an email, a blog post, a sales page, a landing page, homepage copy, a video script, smoke signals, Morse code, right? Like literally you could structure it however you want it to be, and it will do a good job adapting the key points of those ideas into a distilled way that leverages the capacity of the characters you'd have available for a good Facebook post and that sort of thing. But what it won't do is it won't just create your point of view. When it tries to have a point of view, its point of view is vague consensus. Welcome back to the Real Estate Growth Hacker Show. On today's episode, we're going to talk about why AI is damaging your credibility and what you can do to stop that, right? How do we make sure that's not happening, that we're getting good results, that we're not hurting our credibility with our marketing and all of that? So that's what we're diving into today. With me, I have Charlie Madison, the man, the myth, the legend. No Hawaiian shirt today, just a nice, classy, dark heather-looking shirt. I like it today, Charlie. How you doing?
I'm good. I wanted to match you, and Cassie's out of town. I've got 4 boys, and we are just surviving over here. So it is it's a throw a shirt on and hop on camera day.
It's Lord of the Flies. You're just a little bit older.
Exactly.
Love it. Good call. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. Really, the kind of the context of what we're talking about today is ChatGPT has been around for a minute. It was launched in 2021, I believe. Maybe 2022? Yeah, I forget when it came out. I'd actually have to look that up. I have that listed somewhere, but that's not the kind of fact that I tend to store in my brain. Anyway, it's been out for a while, and by and large, I think the professional community has become very aware of it, right? It's definitely a thing in the zeitgeist. People know about it, and I don't know about you, but I can really tell when somebody is using it and when somebody is not using it. As a for instance, I don't think I've ever heard somebody actually say the word treasure trove in normal speech, but it comes up constantly when you're using AI to generate stuff. And so what we're going to talk about today is just that as a concept and diving into that problem, but also how to fix it. What about you? Have you seen that pretty often, pretty readily, when it's just plainly obvious?
It's this incredibly flowery language. It's like a mix of Bob Ross and Barbie. So over the top, flowery.
Right.
I don't know many people that talk like that are not on mushrooms.
Indeed. So yeah, I mean, that's the problem. And the reality is, like, we as humans, we actually are really good at detecting when something feels off like that, right? And it's not necessarily that it's perfect, but we tend to be pretty good at something just feels weird about this. We may not be able to put our finger on exactly why. It may not be that somebody looks at it and says, oh, that's AI generated, but it's going to be that they read it, they're like, this sounds weird. Sounds like the equivalent of the person who thinks that sounding smart is exclusively in saying 5-syllable words, right? Where they just try to throw as many big words into a sentence as possible to look smart, but really how it comes across is they have low self-esteem and they're trying to impress you. That's how those posts come across. And so why is this a problem? Chances are, if you are using AI in your marketing and you don't know how to use it correctly, or if your agents are, or if you're trying to use this in the process to attract agents, you might be literally causing the exact opposite result from what you want to happen. You might be training people to think, this doesn't evoke confidence. This doesn't evoke authority. What it evokes is somebody who doesn't know what they're doing or somebody who's trying too hard, right? Like, that's what it looks like. And so you might actually be hurting your end goals in the process. You might be turning people off to you in the process of trying to use your marketing to attract more people to what you're doing. And honestly, that's one of those times where it would be better, potentially, to do nothing than to do work that actually specifically drives people away from you. But the good news is, it doesn't have to be this way. There are ways to leverage AI where it can do really well for you, but you have to know how to do that right and how to get those sorts of results. And that's what we're going to dive into today. What do you think, Charlie? Does that sound like something that would be helpful for folks? Is that something that you want more information on?
Yeah, we want to use it. It's terrible when it's like so close, but there's something off about it. And I've found those few times when it just works And you're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I've found usually when that happens, I've spent some time with it. Like it's not a one shot. And then sometimes I've just got a really good workflow and I give it what I'm looking for and it converts it into something else. Oh wow, this is great.
Yeah, and you dropped a couple of things there that I think are really part of our toolkit for really getting good results with AI. So let's dive into them. So one of them is, first and foremost, I think it is worthwhile to understand that even when you're doing this right, you still should only expect AI most of the time to get you 80 to 90% of the way there toward that right final post. So if you can't detect where it's off on that 10%, if you can't detect what feels weird, what feels off, then you might need to do a little bit more like study or thinking about just really how you would sound, how you would post. Because if you can't detect it, then chances are you're just blind to what looks weird. But for most of us, we could see that pretty readily and pretty clearly. The problem more so, I think, comes from laziness, better described as busyness, right? We want AI to do all the work for us, so we're allowing it to maybe post without that human check before it comes out. So with the caveat that it's going to get you 80 to 90% of the way there, and you're still going to have to do some manual edits on it even when you're doing this. Just know that, and don't skip that. Make sure that there's a human check in the process. Make sure that you aren't just rely on AI to go out without you looking at it, without you thinking about it, especially in those cases where it's going to get a lot of eyeballs or it has the potential to get a lot of eyeballs on it. You want to have that human check just for sake of that final polish and that expectation. But with that being said, there are the things that we can do that make it more likely to get into the right vein of how to post, how to sound. And we talked about some of these things before, but I think probably the simplest idea to understand is giving it your unique human spark, your unique context. And what's nice is that's actually not too hard overall. Typically, I find that people are already having the conversations, having the opportunities where their point of view comes through, especially real estate team owners and those who are having these conversations, even the agents themselves. When you're talking to agents on your team, when you're talking to agents that you're looking to recruit, when you're talking to potential clients, chances are in those conversations, you're stating your unique point of view. You're talking about how do you do things? What is your take on how things work? And you put it into your own words in a way that makes sense and jives with you. And so what's nice is that if you take the opportunity to make sure that when those things are happening, you're recording them. We talked about this on a recent episode about how capture is becoming more important than create. If you're taking the opportunity to record those things and literally just getting that transcript is going to be a treasure trove of context for your AI models, right? But does that make sense in terms of what we're looking for sake of context and giving that human spark?
Yeah, it's amazing how it can decipher a conversation. I think just last week I had a conversation with a friend and we were talking about referrals while you sleep. And it was over Loom. So it wasn't like a planned recording, but it got good. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to record it. And I threw it in with, it was probably a 40-minute conversation. And the information it extracted was like, wow, that was really good.
Yeah, I love that. That's really part of what's interesting is that going back to when does it make you look bad? It makes you look bad when you have it do the heavy lifting, where you say, write me a good Facebook post about this, or create this thing for me, where you're just expecting it to pull from its training base in order to get you good, solid points of view on a subject. It doesn't do that well. But what AI does right now is when you give it that spark, that context, that point of view, even if it's not structured well, it could take that context and structure it near perfectly in whatever form that you need it. So you can have it structure it as a long-form Facebook post, a short-form Facebook post or tweet, an email, a blog post, a sales page, a landing page, homepage copy, a video script, smoke signals, Morse code, right? Like literally you could structure it however you want it to be, and it will do a good job adapting the key points of those ideas into a distilled way that leverages the capacity of the characters you'd have available for a good Facebook post and that sort of thing. But what it won't do is it won't just create your point of view. When it tries to have a point of view, its point of view is vague consensus. What do we know about marketing? Charlie is looking like everybody else the best way to do your marketing. Is that how we like to stand out?
That's the secret, right? I like what our friend Mike Michalowicz says. If you can be better or you can be different, choose different.
That's the key. When you have AI create for you without the context, it just sounds like everybody else, which is like white noise that everybody ignores. You want it to sound like you. You want it to have a point of view. You want it to draw a line in the sand and say, you're on my side if you believe this, and if you don't, that's okay too, but I disagree with you. Right. You want to have some level of opinion on things, and it doesn't do that well for you. So giving that context helps a ton. That's going to get you 80 to 90% of the way there by itself. But there's still some issues that you could run into if you don't give it a little bit more guidance to get to the ideal outcome. And those things that you need, there's two things, and I've talked about both of these before. You need a style map and you need template. So a style map is breaking down the way that you like to say things, right? And I break a style map down in a few different ways. I talk about the tone. So the tone is all about how does it sound? Is it optimistic and hopeful, or is it like snide and sarcastic and maybe a bit pessimistic or cynical, right? By the way, both of those can work. I've seen writing styles where somebody writes just like they're a pure jerk, but it works because they're conveying their point through it, versus other people, and my vein, I'm upbeat, I'm happy, I'm like, I want to give people hope. So like that tends to come through in my writing. And so you capture those ideas in the tone part of a style map. One of the other things that people miss in a style map is what I call tactics, or specifically tactics around persuasion and education. So as a for instance, AI by default wants to change up a phrase when you're listing something out. But in my personal experience, if you want to persuade or educate, repetition is actually really powerful. So instead of saying a list of items, a selection of things, collection of objects, I said the same thing in 3 different ways. That's what AI is going to try and do. If I was using that for sake of power, I'd say a list of objects, a list of whatever the other thing is that I'm wanting a list of, right? So I'd repeat a list of, and I'd do it intentionally because it actually helps it cement in your brain better. AI doesn't want to do that by default, so you have to tell it to, and you include that kind of information in a style map. For sake of tactics, might include a lot of questions under tactics. You might have things like a bold start followed by an unexpected segue or something. Those sorts of things. What are you doing tactically in order to either persuade or educate? Because that's typically what we're doing through our content, and listing out those tactics. Does that make sense?
I just pictured an unexpected segue on wheels showing up. The actual...
Like, whoa! Surprise segue!
That was so unexpected.
It's like the Kool-Aid man bursting through your wall, but it's a segue.
Exactly. That does make sense.
So what about that makes sense for you in terms of how have you seen clarifying the tactics to be helpful in working with AI style?
Yeah, you do have your unique views. There's the common denominator that is very common. Listers last in real estate, right? That's pretty normal. But there may be, like, what do you believe that's not normal? When I've got my showing agent, I actually said I made more dollar per hour and more profit from buyers with showing agents.
Right.
With your unique context, like, one, what's your unique spin on what everyone believes? But then what is it that you believe that you've experienced that goes against the grain? If you don't tell AI that, it's going to do common denominator, general slush.
So that fits into the context portion. If you give it a transcript of what you're talking about and your point of view, you do want to be intentional about making sure your point of view is there. But for sake of tactics specifically, tactics would be more in the way that you write to convey a point. Using lists, leaning on bulleted lists rather than long paragraphs. To me, the tactics is where you specifically define the things that you have learned or you believe about persuasion and education. So if you've learned from copywriters or if you've read Influence and you want to deploy those tactics into your writing, that's where I document those in a style map. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think for me, that's where I think AI is really cool because I don't have a writing style very much.
Right.
Like, I mean, I'm the kind of person that takes 2.5 hours to write a 3-sentence email. Like, I can talk all day. but like my writing style. And so one of the things that I love about AI is I actually use it to test other people's. That's why I love your vault and your templates.
Right.
Like I can take my context and I can take some phrases like we're going to say compliant clients. We're going to say leads or liabilities. I've got my phrases that I want repeated. But then I can take someone else's writing style, whether it's Paul Harvey or Ben Settle or Dan Kennedy. I can take whoever's and see what works well.
Yeah, and that's part of what I like about this too. That's a really great point, because there isn't necessarily a complete right or wrong, right? That's one of the things that I've learned about this too, is that some of these things are more about getting enough variety to just be able to test, to be able to have enough different posts to test different styles and see what feels right. But the key to me is if you do have an opinion on how you want something structured, how you like these tactics to be deployed, if you document them, AI can make sure they happen, right? AI can leverage that for you. And doing it the way that you just described works great too, where you say, do this like Dan Kennedy, do this like this person. And sometimes when I want it that way, I'll even include specific examples, right? Like I'll take an email from Dan Kennedy and say, please rewrite my email to feel more like Dan's style here. And that could work really great. So that would be under the tactics. Similar but different is in the style map is formatting. So formatting, the way I define that is literally what at a very simple technical nature shows up on the page, right? Am I doing lots of line breaks? Am I using bolding? Am I using emoji? Am I not using emoji? Am I using a lot or a little? Do I have clear definitions on that? So as for instance, under formatting, I really don't like long paragraphs. I've done enough study around this to learn that long paragraphs, for sake of putting out content and posts, people don't read them. It's great for educational essays for school. It's horrible for most of the world in terms of actually reading and understanding what you're trying to communicate, right? So I use short paragraphs, typically sentences no longer than 16 words if possible. So I document those things into the formatting section of a style map in order to make sure that it gets across structurally how I want something written or how I want something created. And that's only going to matter for written assets. If you're putting together a style map for something like a video script, then it would be different. But you give it the style map to say, all right, if I'm coming armed with the context of like a transcript for me talking about something, or even just a brain dump of me writing out my thoughts on something, I'm coming armed with that context. I'm coming armed with a style map that says how you turn this into the other thing that I want based on proven examples, even from my own experience or things that I've gone out and done research on. That's how I put my style maps together. And then the other thing that I do is if I have extreme clarity, so we put out, this episode, people will have received an email that will have pointed to this episode. That email is something that we have a specific template for how it gets written, right? We feed it the context of the episode. We put it through a template plus a style map so that we have a consistent style email that conveys the key points of what we cover on here. Because for me, just like you, I don't have a good habit of sitting down and writing these things out. What I do have is I have the time to show up, talk to you on these shows, create the content that way, which creates the context that we then take and turn in to the other assets that we need, like short form content, emails, blog posts, all of that sort of stuff. But it starts with a context of what we do here to have that unique spark of what we're actually covering. And so we use a template for that email to say, here's how we structure it, here's how that email typically flows, so that our emails have some consistency because that's what we want for this style of email. You may not always use a template, but if you want that consistency, templates are really going to help with that to make sure that AI molds itself to your vision rather than just going off wherever it wants to. And sometimes you want both. Sometimes you want it to have freedom, sometimes you want it to have less freedom, and depending on what you're looking for and how clear your vision is can help to decide if you need to pull in some of those tools or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think hard part is sometimes if we brought in an employee, we would give them a template. And the issue with an employee is then usually they're not going to follow directions every time. And I think with AI, sometimes it seems so smart. It never comes back and says, I don't understand this minute detail. It'll take what it thinks you ask and come back with something. And so it's easy for me to skip this part. But what's really cool about it is this is a foundational thing. If I take the time, like with your email, you took the time, And it probably took a little bit of time to create your blog or your show email template. But now you probably get that knocked out either by your assistant or really quickly because it's done correctly and it's done systematically. That's what's really cool about this is if you give it the mold, then it'll follow it consistently.
Honestly, what you just described that's what I am shifting a lot of how I'm doing business. So I'm putting in the time to build out the systems so that I show up naturally in the context that makes sense for me, that are easy for me. And at the other end, I get assets that still convey my unique point of view, structured the way that I would want them structured. But all I'm having to do is give it a pass and say, does this feel right? Does this feel like what I was looking for? Is it off somewhere? And it's not always right. I learned through this process that I didn't have my ideas clarified as well as I thought I did. And that's really a big signal when I get something back from AI and it's going off in tangents that I didn't describe or I wasn't thinking. Often that means I wasn't clear. Sometimes. Other times it means the model that you're working with just doesn't understand enough of the words that you put in. But if you have the right model, then sometimes getting that information back just means you weren't clear. And that gives you the signal to say, okay, let me clarify this. Let me make sure that I am saying this point as clearly as I mean it. Because that's the reality. If you don't give it the context when you're coming in with a prompt and trying to ask it to do something, it's going to give you vague consensus. Similarly, if you're trying to get it to create off of your context, but your context is too vague, then it's not going to do a good job either. If you don't have clarity in what you're describing, it's going to struggle as well. And what I found is that very often I am clear. I'm clear to what I mean, and I'm getting across the point. But in those times when I'm not, AI is a really great mirror to show that I'm not being clear because it's not getting that point across. And so that could help a ton. One of the things that I just mentioned is one of the other things to note about where AI is potentially causing you problems or not. Staying up to date on what models are best for what can make a massive difference. I don't know what it is, but as of the time of this recording, GPT-4 is starting to feel more and more like it doesn't actually cooperate with what I want it to do. Right? It's good at giving me something, and it's good at restructuring what I'm talking about into some form. But Claude 3 specifically right now at the time of this recording by Anthropic, holy crap, that thing, I just feed it a transcript and a little bit of a prompt, and it comes back with something that's really well structured, makes a ton of sense, and more specifically, it follows my extensive directions really well, rather than following 2 out of the 10, which is what GPT-4 seems to be moving more toward right now. So staying up to date on that could be a really big difference maker for, it doesn't change much about your process, but just knowing which models are actually really working best, because we're still in a little bit of a wild west right now, right? Like, these things are shifting and changing. Who's doing the best is changing sometimes every week. More realistically, it's often happening literally month over month. The best tool to use for something might change in that time period. So knowing what models are set up well for that and having your system set up to be able to switch models quickly can make a massive difference in being able to keep the advantage that these AI tools can do without damaging your credibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are some of those key ideas. If you've been posting and AI isn't quite getting things across, those are some of my foundational ideas for what I do to correct that and still get great results. So it's understanding that if you ask vague questions, it's going to give you back vague consensus answers that don't help you stand apart, that make you sound off and drive people away from you. But if you come armed with context from a transcript or written out notes or even just recordings of coaching calls, sales calls, those kinds of things that are you conveying your unique point of view, that context helps a ton. Giving it style maps where necessary so it sounds like the way that you want it to sound. Giving it templates when necessary so that it's structuring it in the way that you want to. Those aren't always needed, but when they are, they help a ton. Knowing if you're using the right tool and what to expect from those tools, like all these things come together to make a really big difference of actually getting that good, consistent, reliable output that is systematic, that does allow you to scale, that does allow you to have these great benefits possibly being done by a virtual assistant rather than you having to sit down and actually write these things out all the time. Yeah, that's the foundational ideas there. If you like that concept and you want to be able to implement that into your own business, one of the things that we're putting together right now is a cohort where we're going to go through and actually install these systems into your business as a real estate team or a brokerage that runs like a real estate team, where we'll help you be able to put together all these assets that are necessary. Your things like, we didn't even talk about this, but like customer avatars and documenting them effectively to use that with AI, your style maps, your templates, and showing you how to take raw materials like you talking into a voice recording or a training that you did for your office or your weekly sales meeting or the conversations that you're having to recruit agents, anything that you're already doing so that you could show up as you are in the ways that are already easy and probably already happening, but have it result in all of the marketing and equipping assets that you need. Things like your social posts, video scripts, possibly even the video clips themselves, depending on what kind of assets you have. Emails, blog posts, recruiting materials, training materials for the agents that are on your team to make it easier for them to be successful. All of these things, we're going to show you how you could take what you have now and implant the systems in order to do that. We're going to make that easy, quick, and painless. It's a process. We're still dialing in exactly how long the cohort will last, but it's something that would be like anywhere from 5 to 8 weeks, where over the course of those weeks, we're installing and building out a new system in your business. At the end of that time period, you have these things up, ready to go, and are working in your business. If that's something that sounds interesting to you, reach out to us at realestategrowthhackers.com/contact. Let us know that you're interested in joining up that cohort. It is the kind of thing we will only have limited people go through it. Since it's such an involved direct process, people get live interaction, live feedback. We help you build it out directly. We probably only have room. I haven't completely decided. It's probably going to be anywhere from 5 to 10. I'm leaning toward maybe 6 to 8 as being the right size for that. So if you're interested in that, I recommend reaching out and we can get you information on what that's going to look like. Yeah, that's what we got for you. Charlie, any final thoughts on AI damaging credibility and how to fix it?
These are the simple things. You know what's cool is even though Claude is working better now, when you build the templates, you can take the template from model to model. You're going to use AI. Might as well. And is some of this stuff in the vault that you've got?
Yeah, so people can get access. And again, I don't know how much of this I'm even going to keep in my current vault that people can access for free. While it's available for free, you can go to realestategrowthhackers.com/the-vault to get access. We've got a bunch of prompts in there that will help you with some aspects of this, things like SOPs and some of that stuff. But when you join up with the cohort, and then ultimately, if you decide to continue with our mastermind, we have what we call the Amp Intel Elite Vault that has literally every template, every SOP, every prompt that we put together. You get the all access pass to every training that we've done, as well as all of those tools and resources that we've had, so that you could use them in your own business. You could use them to help equip your agents, all of that. So yeah, depending on the level of help that you need, we have everything from a lot of great things to get you started at realestategrowthhackers.com/the-vault to ultimately really anything that we've even thought about, you would have access to. So depending on what all you want, there's options available for you. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yep, that's awesome.
There you go. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Real Estate Growth Hackers. Hopefully this helps you get better results from AI, possibly see some problems that maybe you were running into and understanding a little bit better why, and seeing that there is a path toward having AI actually do a lot of the legwork on your behalf in a way that is scalable, that does work well. And yeah, you just got to put in the right tools. You got to put in the right processes, but then you end up with a really scalable system that makes it easy for you to show up as you are and still get great results. So there you go. Until next time, this has been the Real Estate Growth Hacker Show.
Thanks for tuning in to the Real Estate Growth Hacker Show. Remember, done is better than perfect. To turn the marketing ideas and tactics you just learned into real growth for your real estate business, visit us at realestategrowthhackers.com. If you like this episode, consider sharing it with another real estate professional who could benefit from the information. Or maybe you'd like to subscribe to the show to never miss an episode. You can leave a rating or review on iTunes with your biggest takeaway, helping this show to reach and help more people just like you. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode.